Welcome to this week's lesson number 2 in Circles of Caring. Last week we talked about the importance of being in a Christian community, being in a small group. And this week our lesson is learning to let others help us. Find that passage in 1 Kings chapter 17, verses 1 through 16. And our main point is that God typically works through people to meet the needs of people. And so we're going to talk about that today. Tim, what are some insights from lesson 2 we should be looking for as we study this lesson together?
In this lesson in 1 Kings chapter 17, there's sort of 2 episodes that are back to back. I think they're really interesting to see together. First off, as the chapter begins, Elijah, of course, is fleeing King Ahab. He has declared that there will be no rain, and so now he goes sort of into seclusion, into hiding. In these first few verses, you'll notice that the Lord sends Elijah down to a particular brook down where it enters the Jordan River. And there, totally alone, cut off from everybody, God takes care of his prophet. God takes care of Elijah. It says that he drinks water from the brook, and literally the birds bring him food. I mean, literally, the ravens bring him food. And he's camping there for some period of time, and it's miraculous, completely supernatural, and God is free and God is able to do this. Elijah has needs, and God is able to fulfill those needs with no help from anybody. I mean, God is help from the birds, but that's just God's freedom. I mean, even that just shows God's incredible sovereignty over everything. If he wants the birds to bring you Chick-fil-A, he can make that happen. And that's what happens. Elijah's needs for a certain amount of time are provided for directly from God's own hand with no help, no intervention from anybody. But that doesn't last. And that is the exception, not just in the Bible, but in Elijah's own story. God is completely capable of providing for his needs that way, but that is not typically the way that God provides for Elijah's needs, nor yours nor mine. God typically works through his people. So while Elijah at first camps by the brook and enjoys the water here and the feeding from the birds, eventually God tells him to go and live in a village called Zarephath. And there is a woman waiting with a house there that at first is a complete stranger to Elijah, but this woman will inevitably and eventually have a role to play in God's caring for Elijah.
I think it's an interesting event in the Bible because everybody in it has to be obedient. Elijah has to be obedient to go and to be willing to ask. The woman has to be obedient to use what she has in order to fulfill the needs of Elijah. And so we see everybody having to be willing to be obedient in order to receive God's provision.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Elijah has to leave the brook, and the arrangement there with the bird meals, he could have refused that. He could have just said, no, God, I'm going to stay right here. But as you know, the brook dries up, and eventually the birds stop coming. Elijah could have stayed right there, but he would have probably starved because God's plan was to move him and provide for his needs in a different way. It did bring him into a relationship with a person who at first is a stranger, and that's awkward, but he's to go and live there, just go and live, which means he is to abandon his welfare and his future into the hands of a stranger. And at this point, it's a woman who doesn't seem to have much. She's a widow. She doesn't seem to have a whole lot more than Elijah, but this is God's way. This is God's plan. And at the same time, she's got to be willing to open her door to a stranger, to begin to share the out of the scarcity of what she has, and then to wait and see how God will also provide for her, even as she provides for others. That obedience, as you say, Warren, is key.
And it made me think about group life. Each person has to be, first of all, willing to share their needs. I mean, we just can't sit back and hope that people figure out what we need. But we also have to be willing to help when we can and give what we can. So I think it's a good way to start off our.
Absolutely, and that's the normal way of life, though, Warren. I mean, this life where my needs are met through the Lord, but He's working through people. Yeah. That's life. That's ordinary life. We often want to be like Elijah out on our own, just us and God and maybe a few
Waiting on
ravens.
those ravens.
Absolutely. We want that kind of arrangement because we don't like to be needy in front of people. We don't like to go begging. We don't like to be dependent. But God wants us to love and depend on one another because this is his way of showing us his love and teaching us how to depend upon him.
Yeah, and being involved in Christian community is part of that.
Absolutely.
All right, hope you enjoy session number 2 on Circles of Caring, and we'll see you next time.